So, uh, yeah, Demur is a good start, I guess one could say. Obviously, that's pretty much it. It's a good start. It's not actually, obviously, it's not intended to be a whole game, although, it's a sort of an interesting snippet for a game that is, about a dystopia as such, although personally, if it was about zombies as intimated, although not quite explicitly. And I wouldn't be very interesting, personally, in my opinion. But only my opinion, really. Not really. I mean, it could be still, but otherwise, though, it didn't. What it does have, I mean, obviously, it can always expand and go in all sorts of places, but what it did have wasn't quite the most original story. I mean, it hinted that the child might be a monster, and as it happens, it turned out to be so. So it's not exactly, I mean, the most original, as in many other media. That happens in many other media. It's not exactly, just yeah, one of those things. Um, Otherwise, though, it would be, it would have been more interesting if there was like a proper village as such, where, like, I mean, sure, it's a dystopian environment where um, there's not exactly many people around, so I guess it's understandable, but it still sort of didn't use the environment fully. There, I thought, like, there were lots of objects that didn't really have any use for that, for them. Really, they really didn't have much use at all. I mean, there were, they couldn't be interacted with. The only thing it could be interacted with, treasures, and that's another thing. The treasures, I'm not entirely sure why they required this dexterity, and why specifically dexterity could be gotten only from enemies. It was a bit bizarre that it didn't make much sense, and ultimately the battling system. Not that I prefer one over the other over another. I mean, personally, I'd rather not have, like, it would have been more of an equilibrium if it had a village along with battles and such. Like, if you could, not necessarily, I mean, like a village, but if you could possibly have, like, a few shops with something in there that could be interacted with, that could be talked with. Yeah, I guess it would have been more interesting, but then, just constant battles and just talk among themselves, which wasn't really very much, really. I mean, it didn't happen for very long. It just, yeah. So that's the thing. With regards to battles, though, they were strange. I mean, any system that doesn't really have any leveling up possibilities is strange. Because then, the question is, what is the point of indulging in these battles? And indeed, there was no point. Apart from, of course, copying their abilities. But then, I just realized, you don't even need to go through the battle to copy them. So I just copied and escaped. That's not really much of an incentive, though, for the battles themselves. In the end, I ended up getting the whole base cherry without even, much of a battle. I probably fought, 5 out of 30. That's before I realized that it wasn't really necessary to fight any. So, not much of a positive incentive, in my opinion. I mean, generally, it's not like, I prefer to have an incentive to go through battles. I mean, at least, there wasn't this extended period of, constant trying to escape and failing for some reason. They can never understand why that ever happens, and it's just annoying. So at the very least, all the escapes were successful, at the very least. So it sort of retained its environment, it retained its atmosphere. It reminded me more of Resident Evil than in any other typical RPG. I didn't actually have zombies, but as I say, it had that sort of vibe. Well, I mean, the monsters might as well have been zombies. They were really bizarre. And there were quite a few there. And, you don't expect for such an area to have 30. It's quite a bit. Yeah. So, but it's it wasn't really, in my opinion, it didn't feel like as whole as an RPG could be. I mean, there was something, and what there was taught, as in it was, at least, sensible. Everything that there was interesting, but there wasn't much. I mean, at least it was, there weren't typos that I could see, which couldn't be said of many other games that did indeed at least bother to have any sort of text. Some couldn't even be bothered. So, but yeah, in terms of though, I wasn't entirely sure. I mean, what the point of all the battles were, as I said. Apart from at the very end there, all I could see is for the last battle, because I did happen to be defeated on the first try, but the only thing I could see though is to get the healing capability for every single one of them, the 3 of them. Other than that, I wasn't sure, and even though whenever I equipped my best, it didn't equip it by default or anything, so I'm assuming it didn't think it was optimal to equip, but that's the only thing I could see really as a way to, obviously you could increase the individual stats, and I suppose it did in the end after I copied a few more without battling, as I mentioned earlier. But obviously it's certainly much easier than some other games, which somehow think that some didn't even have. I mean, even if they did have a leveling up system, so some games somehow think that if you have a set number of battles, then that'd be fine, and you could just manage the very end with just a set number of battles. For some reason, this was slightly different, yeah, and that the battles weren't needed per se, which is an odd choice, I guess, unless it was an omission, something that one didn't even consider. But the only thing that was necessary were the copies, right? And so that is indeed what I did, and in the end ended up getting whatever stats it thought was optimal. But the only thing I could think could really help was the 5. I think that was, unless I missed something, I think it was the maximum number of points that could be restored, because it wasn't quite still the most. Well, I guess you could use 2 of them on one person, but at the end, I had to use 3 of them on each individual, which ended up with one character being focused on and destroyed at the end. But somehow the second battle was much easier still anyway than the first. It's a strange system, at any rate, I got to admit. But I suppose all RPGs can have a different system if they want it. Yeah, that's not taken away. So that is a fact. It's still though a bit strange. I mean, if there was a whole game where the only incentive is to copy and you might as well escape, it's just a bit strange, shall we say. I mean, if there's no point in battling them, alright, so the only point were the items. That's pretty much it that I could see. But if you could get, unless you really need it, I guess. What they call elixirs. The items had some strange names. Yeah, and I suppose unless you really needed really good items, then there wasn't much point. As long as you can heal using a skill, which is still always better than some games which don't even give you that for some bizarre reason. And I've played a game recently where you only have a certain number of items. You don't even get any from any battles. Like, what is the point? So I'm just saying. I mean, some games truly have worse battle system for some bizarre reason. So at least this one, I think though, it focused too much on clearly the graphical aspects were the focus, I assume. Not that, but obviously when it comes to video games, you need, I suppose, a balance. And as much as the graphical aspects were interesting, there still seemed to be a bit of writing, a bit of plot, narrative that was a bit missing, in my opinion. I mean, it was short, but even regardless of its length, there was something missing. Like, even the music there at the end, I mean, did it really fulfill its, like, there was regret expressed, but I don't know, maybe it would have been more powerful if it was preceded by several other scenes where they have some sort of emotional connectivity. But honestly, like, obviously this is the problem with short games, that is inevitable, but otherwise, I'm not sure. Seem to focus, as said, in a way it's a bit similar to the Mystic, what was it called, something Mystic, which also focused on the graphical aspects, but I actually didn't have any plot at all, pretty much. Except it was a mostly a puzzle game as opposed to, so the puzzles there are the battles here, I suppose. I mean, the battles here are kind of it's more of a strategy, I guess, rather than a puzzle. But it was a strange thing at any rate to focus so much on the copying aspect rather than. But anyway, it's a decision still that one could make.